French is. Yeah. All right, we're going to get started here. So just give us a brief introduction of yourself and tell us about who you are. Okay, hi, my name is Jerry Covell. I am a third generation deaf family member. Most of the deafness is on my mother's side, my grandparents, maternal grandmother. I also have two deaf children of my own who are carrying on the torch. This is the fourth generation deaf in my family. And those of you who have taken deaf culture class, you'll understand why, having third, fourth generation deaf is such a rich thing. So I was raised with a deaf family, obviously. ASL is my native language. English is my secondary language. I also learned French as a third language in college, but please don't ask me French Sign Language. I don't remember any of that. Anyway. So I have a unique experience. As I mentioned, having a deaf family, being, third generation, having fourth generation, what's unique is that I was mainstreamed most of my education in a public school. However, I have experienced both worlds, having attended a deaf residential school and then being mainstreamed for the last 2 years, and then going back to a residential school. I attended Gallaudet University, and of course, as you are well aware, I was involved in the week-long movement or protest that we know as Deaf President Now that happened at Gallaudet University. I majored in American government, and then I got my master's degree in political science from the University of Maryland. And I worked for the Commission on Deafness in Missouri and Illinois. Oh, let me back up. Before that, before attending the University of Maryland, I taught at a junior high school and high school level. And then once I graduated from the University of Maryland, I came back to Missouri and began the position of the director of the Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And then after a few years, joined Illinois on their Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And I've been teaching for the last 15 years. And it's obviously doesn't align with my major of American government, but I do a side job, so to speak, of advocacy. I help write policy, introduce laws, lobby, go to testify for different deaf advocacy related things. I do enjoy teaching, especially new students who have had no exposure. I really love seeing that transition in them. I also teach interpreting ethics. Before McMurray closed, Jacob, he was a former student of mine, but now I'm teaching online with St. Louis Community College. They have a deaf studies interpreting program, and there are 2 courses, a deaf culture course, and we're talking about me teaching ethics again in the fall, so we'll see where that goes. And that's kind of a Reader's Digest version of who I am. Well, you still look young, Jacob says. Well, I'd like to begin by asking a question. If I remember correctly, in the fall, prior to that protest, they attempted to protest prior? And Jerry's answering no. I had been involved with the students who had vocalized some needs, but there hadn't actually been any action. There had been a lot of talk and a lot of talk about what should have been done. But the college just continued in hiring a hearing person instead of a deaf person in those positions. They thought that, it wouldn't happen, that it was just going to be a lot of talk. And then we know how that turned out. Are the interpreters following me? Okay. Okay, just making sure. And Jacob is saying, so was there a lot of anxiety? Were the students hopeful? What was kind of the atmosphere at that time? Jerry's answering, well, they started with the selection process, the screening process, and that's when we kind of became aware of the narrowing of the fields of candidates. And don't quote me on this, but let's say that there were 6 deaf and 6 hearing. I'm not sure if that's exact, but then, they might have narrowed it to 3 deaf and 3 hearing as the candidate pool got smaller. Then it was narrowed to 3 remaining candidates. 2 of those candidates were deaf and 1 of them was hearing. So that's kind of how we knew the process was going along. And, we knew Gallaudet historically prior to that point. Other colleges had social movements that had happened, in the night before this 1998, like Howard University, a historically Black college. They had hired a Black administrator, and female colleges had hired female administrators, and so on and so forth, that trickle. So we thought for sure Gallaudet would follow in those footsteps. But then it didn't seem to happen because the board wasn't just a majority. It was 18 hearing and 4 deaf on the board. So the chance of the deaf vote winning out was not a possibility. So having a majority hearing controlling the board and their decisions, even when we go down to like the dean level, like the dean of political science or the dean of English or the chair in these different departments, they were also hearing. No deaf leadership at Gallaudet. I mean, they weren't even trying. So we kind of were ready for that protest to take place, but they thought, oh, they're all talk. Everything's going to be fine. It's not going to pan out. And for a few weeks prior, we gave our demands. We tried to rally. We tried to really encourage the board to see what was happening, to make it clear we were not passive in this. We really felt like the students needed to show their choice. This is what we see, and this is what we want long term. But that ended up being unnecessary because it just didn't pan out. So Jacob is saying, so can you kind of give us a timeline of sorts of the protest and the events that happened? And Jerry's answering, well, initially, the board had said, we will make an announcement in the gymnasium. And so the student body, everyone went there. And just prior, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because the board made the announcement on Sunday, so we're talking about those days leading up to it, there were rallies at the location where the board was sleeping. They had like apartments on campus where the board would stay when they were coming for meetings or whatnot. So we had a candlelight vigil, a rally. We made it very evident that we wanted a deaf president. And that was our expectation. So on Sunday, the board said, we will make the announcement at 6 o'clock. So, everyone was just milling around waiting. And then we went to the gym waiting for that. And then there was this pounding on my door and flashing of the light in my dorm room. The light was flashing rapidly, which meant something was wrong. So I went out, and there were 2 students who were just in shock. And they said, they announced a hearing president in the gym. And I was like, but it's not 6 o'clock. And they said, no, they passed out paperwork or a flyer. And I was shocked. I was like, wait a minute. So I went to investigate myself, and there were people milling around all over. And I went into the gym and tried to determine what was going on, trying to find out what happened. And everybody was saying, look, look. And they showed me this reddish kind of paper flyer of sorts that said, we are proud to announce the first female in history to lead Gallaudet University. And I knew no deaf women had applied, only deaf males. So that made it evident that their chosen candidate was hearing. And I was like, oh. So it was kind of like that I told you so feeling. And so on campus, in the main entranceway, and that it's Florida Avenue that runs right there in front of the campus, and 8th Avenue. Those are the cross streets, Gallaudet. So the students were kind of, chaotic, and there were police cars that were already there in the street blocking traffic, just because of the chaos that was ensuing. And so this was, again, on Sunday. And wait, do you have more questions about how we changed the mid people, or you just want me to continue talking about the whole week? Or okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't jumping ahead of your questions there. Okay, so Sunday, again, that was my first exposure to sort of how stupid the hearing people in charge were. I mean, it was just a lot of chaos happening. The provost was a hearing person, and they kept pointing at me. And I realized at that moment, because I really have a fondness for Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers, and how he really spoke about peace. And I know that Martin Luther King had been arrested for inciting movements or marches or, different social unrest that he was involved in. And I know that people would get really agitated with him. So I thought, obviously, he thought the only way to get people off the road was to detain me or whatever. That was obviously what they were saying. So I decided to stand up and kind of, address everyone and have them to have a seat. And sure enough, everyone cooperated with me. They all sat down, they stopped milling about, and everybody kind of stood still. And now looking back, I don't, was that the right decision for me to kind of take over the crowd, because the crowd was out of control? Were the police kind of trying to manipulate me? I don't really know. I mean, I like to think that I had all this power of everyone's attention, but in hindsight, maybe that wasn't the case. So these students, again, were incredibly agitated because, as had been mentioned, this had been going on since the fall, and we knew that something was going to give. And finally, the students were mad. So NAD, National Association for the Deaf, their executive director came and asked for the location of the board members. And there was some discussion about, why, and the campus police had given some information, because what had happened is they hadn't made that announcement in the gym as originally planned. And the reason is that because they had felt the pressure of the student body Friday, Saturday leading up to it, and they didn't want to disappoint an audience. So we had quite a few faculty staff, who were going to be there at 6 o'clock to deal with any fallout, but they just kind of dropped these flyers off and took off. And they had been staying on campus Friday and Saturday. And then on Sunday, the board members moved to a hotel off-site, a much nicer hotel that we kind of found out that was a more upscale. And when we found that out, I mean, the students took their march down Florida Avenue. And the police were already there, they're already parked to prevent other oncoming traffic or whatnot. They were detouring traffic around the crowd. So there was a truck, got a bullhorn out of a trunk, and they started saying things to us, but we're all deaf. So once they realized that that bullhorn was not going to help to direct traffic of deaf people marching, they just put it away. But I thought, how stupid was that officer? I mean, there's, over 100 years of Gallaudet University being here in this location, and they get out a megaphone to try to communicate with a bunch of deaf people. But anyway, the crowd continued down Florida Avenue, and then took a turn on one side street. We thought the hotel, well, in Washington, D.C., there are different areas of the city. Like, this area might have a lot of hotels on this block, and this block might have a lot of restaurants, that sort of thing, and how it's laid out. So we took a turn thinking that we were going to come upon the hotel, and realized that it was the next street over. So there was fortunately an alley connecting those two blocks. So we were able to make our way through the alley. And at that time, there was a press conference for some other event. It wasn't anything to do with this. So of course, there was an audience, right? Cameras, microphones, and then all of this chaos comes through the alley. And so they decided to follow us. A lot of the media just gave up on that press conference. And that night is when the news coverage started from Gallaudet. We hadn't even planned for it to happen like this, but it just happened there. Got it.
So we all thought, well, this is great. Now, where do we go? Sorry, a little bit of technical confusion there. We have switched interpreters. So it happened, that's how it happened, to have media coverage immediately. And they said, where'd he go? Everything's gone. Hold on just a minute. I don't know where my picture went. Can you all see me, or am I gone? You can see me? Oh, my picture is gone. So, all right, well, maybe I can keep going. So, we had an unexpected media following, immediate media coverage. And, the police were already there with their riot gear, in full riot gear with their guns and their face shields. And, we didn't even do anything. We didn't destroy anything. We didn't start fires. We didn't panic. We didn't do any of these things, but they already had the riot gear ready at the hotel. So, it said it was mandatory that we speak. At the time, the person that was the chair, Spillman, who was the chair of the board. So Spillman was married to a man who owned and made Basket Furniture. Have you all ever seen Basket Furniture? Don't do it. You just, no, don't support them. Don't buy their furniture. To this day, I have never purchased anything from Basket Furniture. So Basset Furniture, that's like the anti-commercial for Basset Furniture. If you have another choice, don't do it. Gosh, that was, several years ago. Maybe they don't even own it anymore, but it was, it's mandatory that we speak to Spillman. And it just happened that who came out? 2 students. One had just finished their term as president of the DBG, which is the student body government. Just finished their term as student body government president. It was Tim Rorris. He was one of the 4 student leaders. And then the new incoming president also came out, which was Greg Hillbach. He was also one of the 4 student leaders. So the 3 of us were already standing there. And then the girl was Bridget, and she joined. So there were the 4 of us, the founders, the unofficial founders. That happened that evening, that night. So, it wasn't like we voted to lead. It was just those 2 came out. Okay, you were the past president. You're the new president. Oh, hey, Bridget, you're here. You're the cheerleader. All right, great. Let's all get together. Let's get the crowd excited. And it just happened that the 4 of us were there, and it was serendipitous. So those 2 came out, and we were trying to explain how the board made the decision to us, and we just wouldn't even listen. Said, nope, we just need to speak to Spillman. We need Spillman. Bring Spillman out here. It's mandatory that we speak to Spillman. So Spillman did come, and I can describe it. I don't know if you can really envision that woman. She was a very rich, privileged class. She had the hoity-toity with the bun and the very fancy dress, and she always had exclusive jewelry. She, very, very prim and proper, and just, even the way that she's held her hands was prim. And she just kind of, all right, now listen, wait a minute, quiet, please. And there's no interpreters there. So she just said, quiet, please, please. And the police, were behind her, backing her up. And she had that kind of snooty, and she was trying to explain, the board's reasoning behind all of this. And we just wouldn't even, and she just kept saying, please, quiet, please. And she denies this to this day. But the interpreter said, I am a damn good interpreter, and I interpret what I heard. So what happened was, she said, deaf people are not ready to function in the hearing world. That's what she said. That's what I saw. And I knew that interpreter. I knew, and I decided to ask them, months and months later. I said, all right, really, did she really say that? Or she claims that she used a double negative interpret, and the interpreter only used 1 negative. So, we know better. A double negative means a positive. So she was saying that she used the double negative. She says what she was trying to say was, deaf people are not unready. But who's ever heard of the word unready, honestly? But okay, I want to judge based on, I don't want you to judge based on what I tell you. There's 2 sides to every story, but I believe the interpreter because, the way that she acted that day, she was very judgmental of deaf people. It was very obvious. Oh, you naughty children, look at what you've done. You've made this mistake. That was the attitude that she was giving off. So the interpreter, the doctor said, I am a good interpreter, and I heard what I interpreted. And again, at the anniversary, I asked her again, and she said, I've never changed my position. I've never changed my story. She said what she said, and I interpreted what she said. And that interpreter is a coda, very skilled. And I don't have any reason to doubt her, but, you know, maybe if she wanted to see, you know, maybe she wanted to see the deaf world change, you know, maybe she did that, and maybe she might have that intention, but I'd rather believe that the hearing person was stupid and thought that of deaf people, that we weren't ready to function in the hearing world, because that statement alone was enough. I lost it that night. I said, we've got to win this. We've got to. So we marched to the Capitol. The Capitol police were lined up and ready. You know, they said the Capitol is closed. Okay, so we decided to sit down and discuss what we were going to do. And we realized, you know, we were outside, it was dark, it was hard to see. So we thought it was best to go back to Gallaudet so that we could start really in-depth discussions about what we're going to do. So we marched back to Gallaudet. And I was surprised that we were angry at the hearing board, at the oppression that had happened of the deaf, yet we were not we did not invade the board. We did not invade the Capitol. We were angry, but we didn't take it to the Capitol. You know, like, oh, these deaf people, they're super angry. We didn't do that. We got there. We thought, you know, I'm amazed at our self-control, honestly, at the time. I guess that's my point. You know, it's interesting when you look at the history. There are a lot of, there's a lot of research, articles, and all of that written about the Gallaudet protests. And many say that they never saw a protest that was so peaceful and nonviolent and non-destructive like the one at Gallaudet. We're probably the only group that didn't do the cause damage and destruction and the violence and there weren't arrests. I mean, that was, you know, we're super proud of that in our history. We're one of the only ones that can say we did it the right way. And I think that was very positive because it changed a lot of people's minds and a lot of opinions about deaf people as a whole. You know, they thought all along, oh, you can't, no, you can't, but now they see, oh, you can do these things. So anyway, Sunday night, we went back to Gallaudet and discussed things, and we said, we're going to close campus. So starting Monday morning, all of us at Gallaudet, there were five entrances, 5 gates. So some of the areas were closed during the day. You know, they may open in the morning to let some cars in, and in the afternoon they would close, and then at night they would open again because we had the elementary and the high school on campus as well at the time. So, you know, they would be open 24 hours a day, but the main gate would be open, but the others were closed. You know, they had opening and closing hours. So they may come in for security, maybe at 3 o'clock, they would open them again for the parents to come and get the kids. But we just decided to close and to use padlocks, bike locks, to close all campus gates. So we locked all the gates. And we also locked the administrative building. Understanding that the way that we locked it was there were several students who volunteered, and they locked themselves in the building with a bike lock. So they went into the building and locked themselves in. So, you know, if someone tried to open it from outside, they couldn't open it because the bike lock was keeping it closed from the inside. So we decided, you know, we want to have a discussion with the board. And the board was willing to have a meeting with us on Monday afternoon. So we got together and we were excited. So we sat down at the table with the board, and it was the full board. The full board was there. And the most people who did the talking were all hearing. 2 deaf people sat there quietly, and they didn't say anything. We looked at them for answers, and they just sat there. So we believe, you know, they would believe in the majority rule is what they said. And I thought, you know, don't you have an opinion? And they would not answer. We found out later the reason why they were under pressure to show a unified front. You know, the board has an anonymous decision, and really it was not anonymous. The ones that had voted for a deaf president were the 3 deaf members. So everyone else said they wanted a hearing president. The hearing members voted, the deaf people didn't. So, you know, the majority rules. So they were trying to present a unified front, which was ridiculous. But at that time, we were not aware of that. So we, the board said their piece, and we said we would reconvene and we would have more discussion. So that's fine. That's what the board decided. They would reconvene and discuss it further. So they discussed it. And they said, we will make an announcement. And I can't remember when they said 6:30 or 7 o'clock, we'll make the announcement. Oh, wait, yes, in the evening. It would be an evening announcement. So, and they said, it will be back at the gym. So, and I mean, everyone was there. I mean, I had never seen so many people packed into one place. It was almost like the whole of campus was empty. It was almost eerie because everyone was there. I mean, just teachers, faculty, staff, students, deaf from outside, alumni, whoever was invested in that decision came to that gym. And so we were there and we were waiting, and the board, sure enough, came in. They marched in as a line. They came and they sat on stage, and they got up and they said, we will also have that. And Spillman stood up, that woman, and she got up there and she said, she looked around. She got ready to announce, and there was a deaf teacher, a well-known deaf teacher, who got up, and he got inside information that the board had not changed their mind. They had not changed their decision, that they were planning to make the announcement that they were going to stay with the original intention. So got up on stage next to Spillman and said, hey, just they're making the same decision. They're not going to change. Just protest. And oh, we were mad. I mean, we went through all of this, and what did Spillman do? She again just kind of, children, be quiet. You can't hear me. You can't hear what the board is saying. And we thought, seriously, why do we want to listen? Why do we want it? We don't want to hear. We can't hear. Period. That's the point. I mean, that was shocking when they said that. And the students decided to pull the alarm. And our interest was in calling the students together that week. So we would pull the fire alarms because all of the buildings would flash. When you pull one alarm, all of the buildings would flash. And in the bathrooms, in the bedrooms, in every place that had an alarm would flash when you pull the alarm. So that's how we knew to meet at the gym to discuss the plans and strategies. So that's what we did. Someone pulled the alarm, and of course, panic ensued and the board ran out. So, and she said, you can't hear me. I'm trying to talk. Be quiet. You need to turn it off while I speak. And no one wanted to let her speak. We were like, bye, Felicia. So, the government, the Capitol, we've done all of these things. We don't want to hear her speak. So that night, again, chaos happened. And Tuesday, again, we barred the doors. That was Monday and Tuesday. So, and, this is a learning experience for me as a person. I had never before done a media interview. So, honest, this was a learning. Oh, there's cameras here. Okay, you're going to put me in front of here. Okay, where's my interpreter? It was, kind of awkward at the beginning, but the media people who were doing the interviews and the camera people were worse than me. They were just as awkward. They'd say, okay, all right, I'm going to get ready. Are you ready? Do we have the camera here? All right, where's the microphone? Okay, who do I give the microphone? Can you please tell me what happened? And then they'd hand the microphone to me, and I'd look at them and I go, okay, hold on. Let me give that to the interpreter. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry about that. You're right. You have to sign. All right, I need to give it to the interpreter. And they were just as awkward. Hand the microphone to the interpreter, and then we'd get going, and the camera person would turn the camera on the interpreter instead of me. And so we go, hey, wait a minute, you need to put the camera on me because I'm the one talking. And they were just in the habit of where whoever's speaking, they hear the sound, you give the mic to the person who's speaking, and you put the camera when someone is saying something, you put the camera on the person that's saying something, the person who's speaking. So there was a whole lot of awkward on both sides. So by the end of the week, you know, all of us were super experienced. Oh, you're going to interview? All right, stand here. Here's the interpreter. Here's the microphone. Here's the camera. Here we go. Let's go. All right, everybody ready? Here we go. I mean, we gained such rich experience through that. And it's interesting to learn, you know, we learned the lesson and it's still practiced today. You know, that week, there was no like how media control deaf people. I mean, it was amazing the way for me as a deaf person who was interviewed, you know, we became the news thing and the news people were just as part of it. So it was a positive experience on both sides, I believe. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we just went through the chaos, you know, all the protests and the figuring things out until maybe Wednesday. I believe it was Wednesday evening, Wednesday or Thursday morning. Zinzer, who was the first, you know, the most historical first woman president, she decided to step out of the role, to step down. She realized that it was a movement beyond the board's control. And it's interesting because her viewpoint about the movement, because she felt that we were asking society to change their view about how deaf people. So she felt by being in and staying as president that she would impede the progress of the change that's happening. So that's why she resigned her post and she let progress happen. Even though, you know, and I do applaud her for that, but I disagree. I think it was that a movement. I still believe today that it's not a movement because many of our issues that we still struggle with it today, they've never been addressed. The things that we struggled with then and we addressed at that time, the only thing we addressed was being a deaf president of Gallaudet, period. That's the only, you know, equal opportunities in the workplace, equal respect in education, all of the myriad of things that we still deal with have not been addressed. Those are still a struggle. But when you talk about Gallaudet University, you know, that's been a positive. You know, there's been a deaf president ever since that moment. So we have more deaf in administration. So we addressed that one issue, but the problems in our community and society have not been addressed. So some people say, oh, you had a deaf movement. And I'd say, no, I don't feel that way. We had a protest, period. And we still need a movement.
We're switching interpreters again. The other one must have given up on me. So that was Wednesday or early Thursday morning. An announcement was made that Zinzer was resigning. So, and as a student body, we had 4 demands that we were asking that week from the board. We were requesting for Spillman, the chair, to resign. But we did not want her to continue as chair on the board. We were requesting Zinzer, the newly elected president, be replaced with a deaf president. We also wanted a 51% majority of the board of trustees to be deaf. And then the final one was that there would be no reciprocation or no penalty on faculty and staff for their involvement in that week. So we saw Zinzer resign. So, I mean, that week you saw a lot of people just saying 4, 4, 4, because they were talking about those 4 demands. So they met half of one demand at this point at Zinzer's resignation. So we still had 3.5 demands remaining because Spillman needed to resign. Zinzer resigned, that was part of it, but the other part was be replaced with the deaf president. So we've got half of that satisfied, but they had not yet appointed a deaf person to replace her. So then you started seeing people saying 3.5, 3.5. So as the week continued on, we kind of came to this realization. The police were frustrated because we continued to protest and march, and they wanted to be supportive, but they said we had to have permits to continue for them to provide us with the necessary support. And at that time, it was very last minute. We were causing traffic disruptions and whatnot. So in order to have those marches, we needed a permit. So Friday, there was an official march, and everyone was all on board. We got all the details worked out, and it started early. We had the police in white uniforms that were not, they said you have to stay on the sidewalk, not on the streets. And historically, Gallaudet is French founded, federally funded rather. So it is a government owned, so to speak, but it is also a private institution. So it kind of has this dual role where it, oh, this is federal property. You officers can't touch this. This is private property. Oh, you can't do this. So, historically, it's kind of been that seesaw of using which side benefits them. So the DC police officers were not able to step onto campus without permission or invitation by Gallaudet, because Gallaudet had their own internal security that were licensed to carry guns, could place arrests on campus. And because it was considered private property, they were sort of a private security police force. So in theory, if Gallaudet is government property, then the government should be providing Capitol Police or whoever, the same people that do national park security or government property, but they had never been on campus. And so these officers would always come to the edge of campus, so to speak, and not be able to step on without being invited. They could not touch the sidewalk. They could not come to the sidewalk on Gallaudet's side, because that sidewalk was kind of the neutral, like, boundary zone. They could not proceed past that. So the police would be, flanking the sidewalk sort of at the beginning of the week. And they started to get frustrated with us. So they decided to call the paddy wagon. They came in with zip ties and all of that, and they just started arresting. And Tim Roris, one of the 4 student leaders, decided to go out and confront one of the officers. And there, if you can find it, there's video footage of this, of him approaching. And he said, if you arrest us, may God bless you. And then he proceeded to do the symbol for blessing. And the police officers were sort of, they were just heightened and ready to move. And we kind of blame the officers for sort of inciting and for causing that, because the students weren't really doing anything warranted. And I mean, the Gallaudet wanted it to stop because the board was embarrassed. They wanted the protest to stop. And again, Gallaudet is a federally funded institution. So people in Congress, senators, representatives, the White House, different, Department of Education, they've got a stake in this because federal funds are supporting it. And all of this negative talk about the university, they were putting some pressure saying this needs to be resolved. So it was a source of embarrassment. So they hired a national, well-known PR firm considered in the top 10 in the nation, that firm located in Washington, D.C., to come and try to play the students, to spin it so that the students were the bad guys in this. And really, at this time, we weren't doing anything inappropriate. We were just walking. And they spent a lot of money trying to blame the students. The administration of Gallaudet did. So, you know, the students were saying, we aren't doing anything. We're innocent. And then the next day, you know what happened? All of those police officers were Black. And you're talking about a couple of months later, it kind of occurred to me that transition. It didn't occur to me at that moment, but I'm like, these officers know what discrimination feels like. They know what oppression feels like. They're sort of related to us. There's kind of this kinship and struggle. And it was only years later that research by some deaf individuals started to recognize the similarities between deaf culture and Black culture. And deaf culture is a linguistic minority. And obviously, they don't Black community doesn't consider themselves disabled or anything like that. You know, they just call themselves Black, but they have their own language. They have their own culture. And it is separate from the culture at large. And not all people of color are lumped into that one group. You have Hispanics, you have Asians, you have all sorts of people that are considered people of color, but they're not all in the same as the Black community. They don't identify with that. So it's interesting at that time, you know, we weren't aware of this. We didn't really realize this sort of allyship and shared experiences. So, you know, we had this whole protest song, you know, 3.5, and we were signing these songs and chants, and the officers were really friendly for the rest of the week. But at the beginning of the week, when all of those officers were white, it was a completely different atmosphere. And at that point, it seems that they basically just had given up because they couldn't access the buildings on Gallaudet campus. No one could conduct any business. I mean, the entire campus was shut down. So we started this on Monday. And so then as the week went on, there was they started cutting the bike locks to come in to try to get onto campus. And then they had these, you know, we would lock it again, and then they would come and they would cut it. And it was sort of, you know, we had backup locks for everything. We made sure that when we do something, we're all in. So we had those 4 demands, and we were not going to rest until those 4 demands were met. So we were continuing with those 3.5 demands. Spring break was upon us, and that was midterm week, just so happened. So Friday was going to be break. So everybody kind of got together trying to determine what the plan was going to be. And a lot of students had said, no, we're not leaving. We're staying here. We're seeing this through. This is the opportunity. We need to seize it. And I'm sure Gallaudet probably thought, spring break, we're going to get everybody out of here. We can get this place back under control. But Friday, we had that march. And we had people from NTID, the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, and which is another college that's federally funded. And it's a technical, like more of a trade school, whereas Gallaudet is a liberal arts university. We had people from CSUN, which is a California university. They have a University of California Northridge that has a large deaf program. We had people from Maryland, Virginia, DC, New York, Pennsylvania. We had deaf community coming in droves for this march on Friday. I mean, the crowd of people, I think there's pictures that you can go back and see, but I have never seen that large of a crowd of deaf people. Still to this day, I have not seen that duplicated. I mean, we were deaf and we were proud, and it was amazing to have that much support. So Friday, we had the march to the Capitol, and we went to speak with our representatives, our congressmen, our legislators, those people in charge. And then Saturday we had what was called a Bard Buster Day, where we had like a board buster day, rather. We had a cookout and just kind of, picnic. And then on Sunday, we got a call from the board unexpectedly. And I said, "Hi, this is Jeff Bravin, one of the 3 deaf people on the board." So the call said, "Hey, this is Jeff, and we would like to speak to Greg Hillbach." And if you recall, he was the current president of the student body at that time. So Greg came in, met with them. I'm sorry, came and returned the call. It was on a TTY. Now we have video phones, and I don't know if any of you even know what a TTY is. You'll have to go read up about that. But so this was a TTY call. So Greg came to the phone, and he typed back, "Hi, this is Greg." He said, "Hi, this is Jeff Bravin." And Jeff said, "We would like for the protest to end and for campus to be open back up tomorrow morning." That would be Monday. And Greg said, "Sure, you meet our demands first." And Jeff said, "We have met your demands." He said, "Spillman has decided to resign, not only as chair, but completely from the board." Finally, she was out. We got rid of that rich, privileged witch. So then he said, "I am proud to tell you that I am the new chair of the board." And I mean, just the thrill of having a deaf chair. So then he said, "We've additionally decided to choose I. King Jordan as the president." And he was not completely deaf. He was born hearing. He was on leave from the Navy and had a motorcycle accident that caused his deafness. So this happened later in life, age 22, 23 or so. But then he had gotten involved with the deaf students, learning sign language, still, very hearing, very oral focused, but couldn't depend on auditory language. So it was a positive change. It was the beginning of progress. So now Gallaudet has someone who identifies they're born deaf, raised deaf, from a deaf family. That is what we wanted. And now the current president is also the first female president. But anyway, so we were just thrilled with this news. So then the final demand was no penalty, no repercussions for the faculty, for the staff, for the students, because we were worried about the alarms, because there was they had to pay $600 every time somebody pulled the fire alarm. So Gallaudet was going to have a big bill, from the fire department, and the teachers had refused to teach class. Even though the administration had ordered them to continue with their coursework, the teachers had refused, and they refused to respond to their duties because they were involved in the movement. And so we didn't want them to be disciplined. We didn't want them to be fined or there to be any penalty or repercussions for them, because they didn't deserve to be punished. And for the damages and whatnot, if someone had done something illegal, then they could be responsible for that. But we never knifed any tires. Whenever tires were flattened, it was done by taking the cap off the stem and allowing the air to leak out. Nothing was ever damaged. We never damaged anything. We never did damage to the buildings. We made sure we got keys whenever the buses were driven to block some of the gates. We did that by having a key. We never hotwire the bus. We never did any damage. And it might be surprising to hear that, but that is how it happened. There wasn't a single broken window. I mean, honestly, it's still surprising to me that you would think something would have happened, but no. Gallaudet didn't have to pay a cent in damages. But then we said, what about the board? You know, we want that 51% majority. And they said, well, some have already, you know, been chosen. They have to serve out their terms, you know, depending 2 years, 3 years, whatnot. I think there were 3 members from the US government, 1 from the Senate, 1 from the House, 1 from the Department of Education or something. You know, those had already been appointed by the president or chosen by their respective chambers to serve on the board. So they were saying, you know, we're not really sure how the dynamics of that will work out. So the compromise was they agreed to have a 51% majority within 5 years. And at the 5th year anniversary, Gallaudet had a 51% majority of deaf serving on the board of trustees. So, I mean, we really felt like this was successful. And after this, I mean, the students were celebrating. They went to Florida, they went to go and let loose, and the rest is history, as we say. So, and we're at 59. I took up all the time.
All right. So as you look back now, where's Jacob? Hang on, I gotta find Jacob. Can you see me? Where'd Jacob? Where'd you go? Oh, pinned to the wrong Julie. Okay, finally. All right, I can see you. Hold on a second, Jacob. The interpreter can't see you right now. Okay. All right. Can you see Jacob? Okay. Looking back now. Oh, I lost Jacob again. Am I pinned? I can't find Jacob. Jacob, where are you? I can't see. Maybe the interpreter, can you interpret for Jacob? Jacob, if you want to speak, we can interpret for you. Because Jerry can't find Jacob. So can you see both interpreters? All right. Okay, Julie will copy sign. The other Julie will speak. So my question is, looking back, do you feel like that was a big moment in deaf history? Do you feel proud to say, yeah, I did that? Sure. I mean, it's interesting that you asked me that question. I mean, are you seriously? I mean, I was not proud of that. I mean, hell yeah. I couldn't be more prouder. I mean, it's hard to describe how proud I am because I am part of that history. I mean, I was intricately involved in all of this. So, I mean, you know, Jacob knows me well enough to where I'm a very humble person. I don't brag about my success at Gallaudet. I don't expect people to look at me and give me that honor and that praise. That's not who I am. But yeah, I am proud. I am more proud of how my community responded because the deaf community has a history of, well, I'll just take, getting to the point of the fight and then giving up. And to, I mean, even today, people still do that. It just frustrates the heck out of me. Because we have, laws, we have tools, we have procedures that allow us to change, but for some reason, for some deaf people, it's hard for them because maybe they can't write their English very good. English is their second language and their grammar is not great. But that moment in time was really about people connecting and unifying and coming together. So it's interesting because we talk about today, I still get people letting me know about the ripple effect of that protest, of the Deaf President Now protest. Some people will say, oh, I finally got a promotion after working for that company for 10 years, training other people who became my boss. And then, my supervisor realized, hey, I think this guy can do it. And they would promote me instead. People who would say, I had access to that, whereas before I didn't. I've heard nothing but positive results from the Deaf President Now moment. So of course that makes me feel proud that I did something successful, and I gave, at the same time, I contributed to that. So at the same time, I still advocate, there's still, I'm still heartbroken to see everything that's happening today, especially when you talk about appropriate education for deaf children. But appropriate education for deaf children, job opportunities for the deaf, access to services, especially like mental health services. We still experience problems and difficulties and barriers. For example, we have a lot of deaf people that are still on SSI and SSDI. They think that maybe hearing people don't give deaf people the opportunity to work. Maybe deaf people aren't ready for that, or maybe they can't. And the federal government is willing to spend billions, millions of dollars to support deaf people and say they can't work. Well, why not use that money to enforce hearing people hire deaf people and provide the support services, and then we could become an employed person contributing to society. And then, just things like that. I feel like, once the government realizes that, we can teach our deaf children appropriately, then they will become a contributing member of society in the future. But, it's just, do you want me to open that can of worms? We'll keep the lid on that one for now, because that's a whole other discussion. Jacob says, thank you. And, and I am willing to stay. If you all have questions, I'm willing to stay. So yes, if people want to go ahead and turn on your camera, and maybe if you don't know sign, if we also have interpreters here that are willing to help. People I know maybe want to have some questions answered, and that's fine. I know I talk too much. I'm a bit of a blabbermouth, but once I get started, I just got to finish. I just get going. And Jacob says, yes. So we did have a question that someone has messaged me. So Donna Lawler had a question. She said, would you agree that deaf is an ethnicity, not a disability? Let me make sure I understand your question. Do I say deaf is an ethnicity, not a disability. That's what you mean? Yes, that's the question that's being asked. I have never viewed ourselves as an ethnicity. We identify as deaf culture. That's a deaf identity, a cultural identity. But I can't speak for other deaf people of color, people of different cultures within the deaf community, Black, people of color, Mexican, Asian. I cannot speak for them. I do know for a fact that when people are involved in the deaf community, they do identify by their ethnicity within the community as well. Like, I am Black deaf. They use Black first, so ethnicity first, and deafness is a secondary identity. So I'm an Asian deaf. To them, you know, going into the hearing community and the Black community, they identify themselves first as deaf. So when they're in their ethnic communities, they identify first by deafness. When they're in the deaf community, they identify first by ethnicity. So deafness is important in Black culture, in Asian culture, because access is a problem in those cultures. Whereas when they're in deaf culture, the problem is color of their skin. So ethnicity becomes the issue within deaf culture. So I don't want you to think, oh, deaf people are nice and friendly and inclusive. No, deaf people are a small part of a large community. And what problems we have within the large community are mirrored within the smaller communities as well. So, you know, that whatever the majority practices, whether it's racism or discrimination or, you know, sexism or what have you, that's also going to be experienced within our deaf culture as well, in the smaller culture. So that's why, you know, people will say, hey, wait a minute, no, I am a Black deaf person. You need to see me and see that ethnicity as well. So we, you know, understanding that we just started learning about that. So, you know, oh, hey, we're about deaf pride, deaf culture, but we're beginning to see, and we're starting to really understand intersectionality and the difference in the races and the sex and the gender and all of that kind of stuff. So that also applies to our culture, not just the majority culture, but also our culture as well. So you can see differences within and diversity within our culture. So I would not say deaf culture as a whole, we can't say it's an identity, but it's not, we don't identify with disabled. I say it's a cultural identity. I mean, and culture can include so many different things, such as race and such as, you know, disability. You know, we still can't hear. We still don't have access. We still, you know, we're not denying that. We're not, you know, we're not denying anything based on race. We're denied things based on our ability to hear or not, if that makes any sense. All right, thank you. And we do have another question. It says, this is from Jean. Do you prefer that deaf children be educated exclusively with other deaf children? And what is your perspective about quote unquote special education? I assume that we're talking about I guess the question is, who is the teacher? Are you talking about teachers? Are you talking about children be educated? So are you speaking about direct instruction where deaf people are instructed by deaf teachers? Or are you talking about children with hearing teachers teaching deaf children all in a self-contained classroom? Are you speaking of people being mainstreamed? I guess that's almost too broad of a question. I kind of need that narrowed a little bit. Do you mean direct?
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. And I'm sorry I do not sign. So that's a great question.
And there's no discrimination on Erin. You are welcome to participate.
So yeah, so I'm actually the parent of an autistic young adult and an advocate on behalf of other special education families and educators. And we have many challenges, as I'm sure you are well aware, and I'm becoming more aware of deaf culture. which I appreciate. So I think I have to think about your question. I was thinking of inclusion within the larger public school setting. We have some parents who want that for their deaf children and others who do not.
Okay, let me hold on that for a minute. Jacob, do you have, that, again, this is going to be an extensive answer, and I don't want to take away an opportunity from another question, because I completely understand where you're coming from. I also advocate for deaf parents or deaf children during the IEP process. So I think maybe it's better if you and I discuss that offline or discuss that at a different time, because again, I would love your perspective. I want to answer it appropriately and understand and help you understand how to educate or advocate for deaf children. But the answer itself is very involved, and I don't want to take away. So, you know, Jacob will share my email with you, and if that's all right with you. I don't want to be rude because again, it's an extensive answer, and I want the opportunity to discuss. I'd love the opportunity to discuss this more in depth with you. And Jacob says, I will send the email. Yes. Okay. And then from Abby, what is the most important, sorry, let me back up. What is the most important thing you learned from the protest? Deaf president now, and which aspects of the protest are you the proudest of? All right, let me think for a minute. I don't know if I would say that this is something I learned, but I think during the protest, it became so obvious to me that I realized that it needed to be done more often. Let me say, for example, during the protest, well, before the protest, I noticed that the hearing people had a way of approaching a deaf person for the, you know, when they meet them for the first time. It was the way that they would react was one of two ways. It was either with fear or they wouldn't know what to do, ignorance. And so they were trying so hard to fix or accommodate things. So the result ended up being that I still felt press still felt looked down upon, even if they were trying hard. I grew up in that environment because I was around hearing people. I was mainstreamed in school, and I used to work at McDonald's. You know, I was a cook on the line, and so, you know, someone would come up, and it would be during the protest. I saw the same thing happen. Remember, like I explained about the camera. The news media, how they, you know, it was awkward, and they would give the microphone to me and the camera on the interpreter instead of the other way around. And I realized that hearing people oftentimes, and it's not just hearing people, but human beings, you know, naturally they have compassion. I mean, except for some people, but you know, that's a whole other thing. Maybe those people are, you know, serial killers or whatever. Those people may not have compassion, but just in general, people every day have compassion, and they have the ability to serve or want to help or want to be friendly. You know, that's typical of people. People that work in retail, people that work in food service. You know, people that work to serve. But people typically will, when they come across a deaf person, it becomes awkward, and they have a conflict inside because they want to serve and they don't know how. And that moment to me is it's a teachable moment. I can teach them and take that opportunity. And often deaf people just get frustrated. Oh, that person's so dumb. And I think, you know, if I can take the time to explain and show them how I can communicate And maybe I'll point to the menu. You know, maybe they realize the next time that they meet a deaf person, they remember, I had a good example. I went to the store. I was young, and I'd say I can't hear, and I would carry paper and pen with me. You know, my parents told me I had to do that. Hearing people don't know anything. They're dumb. So you got to take, they're ignorant. You got to take your paper and your pen with them. So, you know, during the protest, I saw people will accommodate a deaf person if we tell them, hey, I can't hear. Let's write back and forth. Oh, okay. And then sure enough, the next time I came, they were ready with paper and pen. And they knew me, they recognized me, they knew, maybe it's a text message, maybe we text back and forth. But deaf people are willing. And other people, once you show them, they try, but maybe their actions come across as discriminatory. They may not mean it. We know that some people do things intentionally. Some people have that judgment factor. They don't care, you know, just like sexism, men misogynists, they think that women can't do anything. We do know that there are people out there, but that's not the majority. But really the majority of people are willing and are compassionate, and that impacted me. Deaf people are responsible to help hearing people understand how to work with us and communicate with other deaf people. Like, you know, there's 20 students and there's 20 of you, one of me. So, you know, maybe there's how many people, there's 300 million hearing people in America. So it's impossible that 20 people can successfully change this. But if we, you know, the thousands of people start to teach thousands of people, the impact and the thing is it will change. It can change. So that's what impacted me the hardest from the movement, from the Deaf President Now. You know, it just starts with one person, a deaf person teaching a hearing person how to communicate. But you have to tell people how to accommodate. They're willing, they just don't know how. How would they know if they've never had to do this? They'd never met a deaf person before. How would they automatically know? And then second, the thing I'm proudest of is, you know, I can't tell you that anything would ever match that other than being the father of 2 children. That's the only other thing I am as proud of. So Deaf President Now, and then the father of my 2 children, those are the only 2 things I've done worthy of anything in life. Yes. Okay, last question. Did you have any hearing people involved in the support and the protest?
Yes, we had the interpreting community as a huge ally. I mean, we had interpreters that were providing their services at no charge, pro bono. We had a lot of people who were friends of deaf, parents of deaf, who jumped on board because they were in support of our cause. And there was one union, even the AFLC, I believe, that the guy who was in charge of that has now passed away, but they came in and gave $5,000 to the Deaf President Now fund, that we used those funds that week to provide food and drink for the interpreters and the people that were in attendance. And that gentleman was the union president, and he was in support of us. Howard University, if you remember, I mentioned them earlier. Howard University got involved, providing their support. They said they would be happy. Because that Black community is very, very experienced in protesting and marching, and they offered, even that Friday when we had the march that I had spoke about, that was the organized march where that we had the permits and approval for. We even got permission from the Martin Luther King organization. We even had his I Had a Dream banner, the same banner that was used when he passed away, that, the Black community had historically used that. It meant a lot to them, and they hadn't used it again from his death until the Deaf President Now protest, that I Have a Dream. banner. So, I mean, looking back now, I just think, wow, the Black community, we had that affinity, but we didn't really, they identified with us and we didn't really realize it, that we had this, you know, shared experience. Okay, Jacob is asking, does anybody have any final remarks? And Jerry is saying, does anybody know our interpreters? Does everybody know the interpreters? And Jacob is saying, maybe they might know them from deaf history class. And Jerry is saying, I always like to just kind of ask about the interpreters and their background and that sort of thing. So Julie Buckham, the interpreter who's talking right now, what's your background? How did you get involved with interpreting? Oh, voice you sign.
Yep. Okay. We'll do that.
I've been interpreting for about 20 years. And the first time I met a deaf person and was unable to communicate with them, it just struck a chord with me. And I was young and naive, and I was going to learn sign language, and I went to the library and checked out a book. And obviously, the more I learned, the more I realized I had a lot to learn. So I got involved with the deaf community, enrolled in college, and the rest is history. And Jerry's asking, are you certified or licensed? Both. In the state of Kentucky, you have to have a license to interpret. And Jerry's saying, good, that's great. And so you've been interpreting for 20 years and you enjoy it? Absolutely. I love it. And Jerry's responding, that's great. So do you teach? No. You should share your experience sometimes, Jerry is saying. Maybe I will. Okay, and Jerry is saying, oh, you guys both have the same first name. Both of the interpreters are named Julie. Julie Johnson, what's your deal?
That's my story. Julie, are you going to interpret for me?
Mm-hmm.
So I am also a interpreting training program graduate. I graduated from Maryville College, which is in Tennessee, in 1998, and started working for the Kentucky Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing right after that, and worked there for 8 years until I got tired of driving to Frankfurt every day and took a job in Louisville. And I have been in Louisville ever since. So I also did not meet a deaf person until high school, but had always been fascinated. You can blame that on Sesame Street and Linda Bove. I was always fascinated with sign language. And when I found out it was an actual job, I jumped on it. And the rest, as Julie said, is history.
And Jerry is saying, so I don't know if these students here maybe realize that interpreters would always simcom back in the day. They would speak and sign at the same time. But we know, especially if you want to be clear with both your English and your ASL, you can't do both at the same time. So, and I know research shows, some people say, but look, I've done it. No, research shows that you will drop from one of those two modes of communication. One of those two languages will suffer. It is impossible for you to do both effectively at the same time. So you got to pick one or the other. I don't care which one, if you'd rather sign or if you'd rather voice. But I know that it is a pet peeve, and I know it's hard for interpreters they prefer to speak instead of sign because then they hear somebody voice interpreting for them. And if there's an error, it's really hard to manage that. Am I right? And this is Julie, the interpreter. Yes, I'm just agreeing with them. It's very difficult. And Jerry's saying, yeah, I know a lot of hearing interpreters that will sign and then, you'll see them. They would rather just voice it for themselves and then have the other interpreter sign for them. It's just easier. Okay. Anything else? And Jacob is saying, Lee, Austin, Sonia, anyone? Any questions? Lee, did you have a question? And Lee is saying, no, I didn't have any questions. I just saw my name, so I was checking in. And Jacob is saying, I just wondered if you had any questions. Well, I just wanted to say thank you to Jerry for coming. I am a professor here, instructor here at the University of Louisville. And Jerry is saying, yeah, anybody can email me if they have any questions. And Jacob just reiterating, Lee saying, thank you for coming. And Jerry saying, it's been my pleasure, to share this part of deaf history. And Jacob is saying, well, I think that's it for today. So I see Danny here. Okay, well, thank you all, Jacob is saying, and Jerry is saying goodbye. Yeah. Jerry's asking, are the interpreters paid or are they volunteer? Austin, can you repin? Is that better? Everybody's left now, so. Okay, well, thank you, Jerry. Jerry's saying, yeah, and thank you to the interpreters. Seems like they did a good job.